I have been following along with the rise, but more recently, the shocking fall of what once was America's third largest shopping mall, Century 3 Mall in West Mifflin, Pennsylvania. I made an abandoned episode on it back in 2021, not long after it had closed permanently. But since then, quite a lot has happened in the last 4 years. A shocking amount, in fact. So today, let's take a look at what has happened since. This is the 2025 update of Century 3 Mall. I ended my last video on the property back in 2021, stating that it was only a matter of time before people started to find their way in and nature began taking the structure back. It turns out that's exactly what would end up happening. Century 3 was supposed to be demolished starting in 2020, though that would never happen. Their somewhat notorious owner, Moonbeam Capital Investments, would instead just shutter the mall and put the property up on the market. Meanwhile, JCPenney, the mall's last anchor tenant, had closed down for the final time, its glass doors the only way to see inside the mall. With that peak of the interior concourses now closed, it was now up to explorers to give the public any peek at what the interior of the building now looked like. Despite security still being on site, people were finding their way in. Mostly kids, which just tagged a few storefronts. The building was enormous after all, and only a lone security guard could only do so much. The YouTube channel Free For All, which I do like, ultimately got in by early 2022. They showed not only the sporadic signs of vandalism, but also a ton of water damage, likely from burst pipes and leaks in the colossal roof. Some areas were worse than others, like on the second level near JCPenney, which had a massive pool of sitting water across the walkways. Now with it under the sun, it was growing a thin layer of moss. The terrazzo floors across the mall, which weren't covered in pools of water, had a slick coating of fire extinguisher dust, again, almost certainly due to vandals breaking in. Power still remained on across the building, and while all the usual signs of early decay in an abandoned building were present, Century 3 still looked about the same as it did the day it closed back in 2019. But documentation also breeds intrigue. And when the name and location of an abandoned building gets out and is easily accessible, typically things are going to go downhill pretty fast. Within a year, by early 2023, the interiors of the building had been trashed. Debris scattered the floors, with windows smashed out, and weirdly toilet paper tossed all around the cavernous center court. Rather creepily, this was all while the lights remained on inside the building, almost like there was still life inside the now dead structure. As more people made videos about the mall, still with active security on site, things continued to escalate. By April of 2023, a fire had broken out on the third floor food court area. It only caused minimal damage inside, but created a decently large hole in the roof. It was likely a result of arson. The owners and city responded by cracking down on trespassing, blocking off all the vehicle entrances to the property, and shutting off the power and water to the structure. While the potential sale of the mall ultimately fell through around this time, the bad news continued for the building. By June, just under 2 months after the fire, a teenage boy had fallen through the mall's crumbling roof and was then taken away to the hospital in critical condition. The city was clearly getting fed up with the blighted mall and all of the trouble it had brought, this incident being the leverage they needed to seek action. Local West Mifflin city officials would go as far to reach out to their district's congressmember to try and get federal support, all while they held a city hearing about what to do with the structure and whether to formally condemn it, which could force its demolition. As they held public meetings, members of the area would have the opportunity to speak out about the mall. And whether it was justified or not, people were clearly upset.
We have young children. We live less than a mile away, and I'm afraid for our kids when they're playing outside. You don't know who's around because of the squatters that are residing in Century 3 Mall.
This was all while local police were trying to make a show of force. Later in June, a trio of YouTubers filmed a poorly produced and a generally bad video of them getting to the mall, one of them wearing a shirt that says influencer on it, then shooting the center court decorations with a bow. They would ultimately be charged with trespassing and publicly shamed across various news networks, perhaps to an excessive amount. West Mifflin City Council would ultimately unanimously vote to condemn the structure and move to have it demolished. They would also fine the property owners, Moonbeam Capital, around $250,000. The owners, as a result, would fight the condemnation, and just like they had done with another mall in New York, they had failed to pay their fines. The DA office then criminally charged them with one count of making a public nuisance and another count of causing or risking catastrophe. It seemed as though Moonbeam Capital knew the writing was on the wall for them, and unlike other property owners, like the ones which possessed Northridge Mall, they presumably got the idea that none of this was going to go away until the structure actually came down. So by March of 2024, the city announced they had begun working in good faith with the owners for a plan to demolish the mall, and with the public in full support of the raising, construction equipment quickly began to accumulate on site. By this point, the exterior of Century 3 was a mess. The parking lot was torn up and pothole-ridden, the roof had much of its HVAC units stripped for parts and rusting away, while the many monolithic walls of the structure were covered in graffiti. Foliage surrounding the building had grown out of control, while the parking garage remained as a crumbling dark hazard. As for the interior, well, it actually seemed like the sheriff's office succeeded in deterring trespassers. That is, trespassers sharing their stuff online. Very little had been captured during this time, though it also seems as though the police were getting a little trigger happy, as they accidentally charged another YouTuber for filming a video inside the building. That is, despite that video being filmed years prior. The condition in that Urbex video of the mall clearly dated it, and the charges would ultimately be dropped. Despite all of this drama though, people still got inside, and some of the final images within showed a former glitzy mega mall in a sheer state of total destruction. Most walls had now been spray painted upon, while the glass of storefronts and panels of railings had all been smashed. The floors had now been covered with all sorts of debris, as if a bomb had gone off. It certainly didn't help that the roof across this 1,000,000-square-foot structure had leaks all over the place, causing soaking ceiling tiles to fall down and create pools of water collecting on the carpets, which, under the sun, had now turned to a dark green color. The humid, smaller storefronts became toxic atmospheres, with their interiors decaying and their backrooms a horrifying, uninhabitable mess. The overall decline of Century 3 was pretty shocking, especially for those who visited the mall while it was open, and by this point, its days were now numbered. The city, now with some cooperation from Moonbeam, finally got started with the demolition in late March 2024. At the total estimated cost of around $15 million, demolition crews would first start with the massive parking garage, moving rather slowly section by section, taking down around 3/4 of the parking deck by July of that year. Meanwhile, crews began stripping out the vast interiors of the building. Since the demolition company's contract likely had the salvage rights to the building, they carefully stripped out the aluminum, copper, and any other valuable materials worth saving. The rest would be piled in large heaps of junk in the former center court. Unlike many other malls during demolition, it seemed as though the crews here would be much more meticulous with their deconstruction, completely gutting sections of the interior right down to the steel beams before anything was taken down. It wouldn't be until September of 2024 when demolition would finally begin on the actual structure, starting first with the JCPenney. Just as meticulous and methodical as they had been with the parking garage, the crews were taking their sweet time, in some cases manually removing each steel support from the glass overhang, and even stacking and salvaging bricks from the building. Honestly, it is a pretty good case of reusing and recycling as much as possible from the structure, but by doing so, it also results in a very slow process. It would take almost 3 months just to tear down the JCPenney anchor store, and finally by the end of 2024, crews would reach the main center court area. Progress would then speed up a little bit, chipping away at the now stripped building bay by bay. By spring 2025, only half the mall had been torn down, around 400 days since demolition had begun at the time of writing this video. That's a pretty long timeline despite the size of the structure, especially when you look at other similar mall demolitions like Jamestown Mall. That structure saw a complete razing in around 130 days. In fairness though, despite that mall having a similar square footage, it didn't have an outdoor parking deck. It's also a less complex structure than Century 3 is. I also don't think anyone from that demolition crew was saving anything from that structure. Today, the former shopping mall is still being torn down, likely a demolition that officials have said will finally conclude in 2026. Again, a very lengthy timeline. What's left today is nothing more than an empty, stripped, literal shell of what it used to be. The perimeter road, which had been in rough condition for years, was shut down in April 2025, while the former mall entrances, particularly the northeast one, looks like it's straight out of an apocalyptic film. While crews continue to chip away at the massive structure, a guarantee that it will soon be all gone, the future plans for the site are a little less defined. The mall sits on nearly 80 acres of land, and for years, various proposals have been put forward to redevelop the property, all of which haven't really materialized in any way. In late 2024, city officials and Moonbeam declared their intentions to prep the site for a multi-use development, likely taking a year following the demolition to grade the site and subsequently sell it to developers. The city hopes that whatever new development would come in might include commercial, residential, and retail, likely not too dissimilar from what sprouted up around that area. And yeah, it'll probably be more uninteresting urban sprawl, but really, the site isn't great for much else. So I think it's safe to say that the story of Century 3 Mall is now over. And it was one hell of a story. Century 3 Mall was promised to be a super complex from the very start, and following its opening and becoming the third largest mall in America, it served its purpose as a retail hub for all of West Mifflin and the surrounding areas. However, as it declined, its vast space made its flaws only more obvious, and before long, the entire structure was in deep trouble. I remember visiting myself with Dan Bell in 2018, and the entire nearly 1.5 million square foot mall was pretty much empty. So obviously it wasn't a surprise to see it closed for good, but it was pretty shocking to see what it turned into just a few short months and years following the closure. As more people got inside, the ghostly interior turned into what looked like a war zone. And even with security on site and an active police presence, which is why I never made the trip out to see it myself, the building still declined rapidly. Seeing images prior to its closure, let alone footage from the 80s and 90s, compared to what ended up happening, I mean, the juxtaposition is truly unbelievable. It's why I wanted to make this follow-up. Really, the legacy Century 3 leaves behind is complicated for many. Some might remember the good old days, and some, like me, will probably remember it for what it became at the very end. A shocking reality, perhaps a poster child, for indoor retail in America, and what ended up becoming the country's largest abandoned mall. Thanks for coming with me on this quick journey through Century Mall's later years and what ultimately happened to it. I know this video was a bit short, but sometimes I just like to check in with topics I've covered in the past. If you have ideas for future update videos or future abandoned episode ideas, let me know in the comments, as I really do read each one. Until next time, my name is Jake, and thank you very much for watching.